Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking About Survivor. I am Christiana Ellis.
I'm Mike Mateen.
Tonight, we're talking about the finale of Survivor Season 38, Edge of Extinction. Boom, boom, boom. And I know the whole internet's talking about a different finale today, but, there's time for that later.
Yes, we'll get to that one too.
Yeah.
Not in our discussion, but just in our
Right.
personal, in our lives. We will be done well in enough time to.
Indeed. And in fact, tomorrow night, the Beyond the Wall, the Game of Thrones podcast that I'm on, will be streaming live tomorrow night to talk about that finale. But tonight, just like it says up above me here, we're talking about Survivor. And on the whole, I think that some hiccups aside, I'm pretty satisfied with the finale.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the way that it happened. I enjoyed, and obviously Chris won. I mean, we'll on it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we're assuming everyone's seen it by now.
Right. And
yeah.
And it's fun. I think it was funny because I used him I believe last time in sort of as like a wild card of coming back.
Yeah.
Like I said, well, what if somebody like Chris comes back, where they're not dangerous enough, because he kind of fit in that. And I have to say, the way he handled himself when he came back was about as perfectly as you could do it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that was kind of my overall impression when I say a few hiccups. Kind of what I mean there is that when he won the challenge to come back, my feeling was kind of like, oh, well, he's not really one of the more interesting people that could have come back into the game. But boy, you have to give him credit for some, high intensity, high stakes playing. He had a very limited amount of time to make his moves in, but boy, he made them, and it's hard to argue with the outcome given everything that happened. So I still wouldn't have thought initially that he was one of my favorites to have come back. Like, oh boy, I can't wait to have Chris back. But that said, once he got back, he sure played really well. And it's, of those three, I think it was the right answer.
Yeah, I think he earned it. I think his gameplay is I think Gavin would have had a really, really strong argument had Chris gotten there even a little bit of a different way.
Right.
That's the thing is, I think both of them realized that beating Devins in the fire challenge was like the path to victory.
Yeah.
And so Gavin was prepared for him to be the one sent to do it. And he wasn't expecting Chris to just say, you know what, I'm going to do it, And had it gone down that way, had Chris and Gavin been in the finale, and Gavin had been the one who had won the fire challenge to put out Devins, then I think Gavin would have won. So I said, I think Chris had to hit all the right notes in that very short period of time.
Right.
And I've been saying for a while, not to sleep on Gavin as a potential winner because of being a strong player, a likable player, but just enough under the radar that he was going to make it the whole way.
Right.
And he did. He did everything he needed to do to win this game. Mm-hmm. Chris just had a few cards and played them correctly that got him to the victory.
Yeah. Well, and Gavin still got 4 votes too, which Yeah. So, I think that to some extent I did feel some disappointment at having Devins go out just because he had been playing such a high wire act of gameplay so well for so long, and then he made what in hindsight is clearly a tactical error in giving the half of the idol back to Chris.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, just given what we know about who he is, it would have felt weird to watch him refuse to give it back. Right?
Right. And I don't know that it would have ultimately cost him in the end, but it would have been a little bit of a misstep that way. I don't know that he had a winning scenario in there. I think, and again, for him to also then have to forecast that Chris was going to be the one to go, use the idol, save himself, and then come back and win the immunity, and then decide to go against Evans and beat him in fire. Like, there's a lot of variables that still had to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, to some extent it was a gamble, because essentially what he's saying is he knows none of the others will have any loyalty to him at all. Right? And so he knows that if it's Gavin or Julie making the decision, it's a sure thing that they won't pick, and they won't pick him. Right? What he's doing is a gamble to say that it's possible for Chris to not return this favor, but at least maybe there's a chance he will, as opposed to the idea that they wouldn't at all. Not to mention that not giving it back to him, it's a case where I think, in hindsight, maybe it wasn't the right call, but it's not a definitive thing. It's just one example of something where maybe he could have made another decision, and yet, even though I don't think any of the players would have held it against him, it would have felt strange, for me at least, as a viewer, saying, this is who I have come to think of Devens as, and how he plays and what he's doing. I think I would have felt weird about it if he had refused to give it back.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying when you first said it. It's like, well, ultimately it may not have cost him, it wouldn't have felt great. And then there's the other, like, if you think about the other ways that it could have gone down, if Devens gives it back to him, Chris plays it, and then doesn't hold up his end of it, which he didn't, but let's say Devens goes against Gavin, beats Gavin in the flame building challenge, and then he's sitting at the end with Chris. Mm-hmm. Not only does he have his entire resume already, but he can say, and the guy sitting next to me is only there because I gave him part of his idol back, and he did not repay his part of the bargain. Mm-hmm. And Chris's only argument is like, well, it's because you would have beat me. And it's like, but then that just sets it up like, yeah. Everybody's like, yeah, he would have beat you, and now that's just another, you're almost like telling us we should vote for him. Mm-hmm. So Devens would have been in a great spot if Chris had, reneged on taking him along, because the only way he can justify that is by proving to the jury how good of a player Devens is.
Well, it was funny because, like, in the reunion special, Probst didn't even ask people how they would have voted if Devens had won the fire-making challenge, because it seemed to everyone a foregone conclusion that if Devens in the final three, he wins. It seemed like everyone was on the same page there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I think they sort of just didn't waste their time with it and just went straight to that, like, fan vote or SIA vote, whatever the thing is where you that you make, where you're like the favorite. I don't know, but you decided to do that instead because it was so obvious that he was the favorite.
The SIA award, yeah. But again, so it's just one of those situations where it seemed it's rare that you have one player who kind of ends up being so dominant and yet doesn't quite get over the finish line. Because, he still theoretically could have won the fire-making challenge. It wasn't impossible. But, that's not how it worked out this time.
No, and this was such a great, like, I really like the fire-making challenge. I know there has been some dispute on the internets about whether it's, shouldn't you just get to pick who you want to be there? But I think it's cool because I think if you really are a great player and you make it at least that far, you've got one last shot if you know how to do it to make sure to get yourself back in and win. Yeah. And it fits within the theme of the game.
I agree.
A thing you're supposed to be able to do. So
it's so dramatic.
And it's fun to watch.
Yeah. It's suspenseful, it's exciting, it feels thematically appropriate.
Right, and it gave us a moment like this where if this wasn't a part of a factor in this, then people make very different decisions, and you're in there with it would probably still have been the same final three. Gavin, if Chris could have just gotten rid of somebody, he would have just gotten rid of Devens. Right. And we would have had the same people there, but Chris wouldn't have had that piece on his resume to, like, and it would have been a little bit closer, and Gavin might have tipped the scales to Gavin. Because I think Gavin made a... did I lose me? Did you lose me?
Well, you roboted for a second, but you're fine.
But I'm good now?
Yeah.
Okay. because I thought Gavin made a phenomenal argument that I wasn't necessarily expecting of the, hey, like, it's cool, but you got to go hang out with the jury. Like, I know it was hard over there,
Mm-hmm.
but I had to sit in a place like where I was threatened to be getting voted out every 2 days, and I made it here. Like, you only had to do that for like 4 of the days or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
but he painted the picture of like he made it in a way that you almost like he took away some of the glory of having been
Yeah.
come to
No,
extinction.
I
Yeah.
I half agree with that because on the
Okay.
one hand, I think it is an excellent point in terms of the relative advantages and disadvantages. But what I really didn't like is how people started talking about it like it's an unfair advantage. And I'm saying there's nothing unfair about it. This is the rules of the game.
Right.
It's not unfair. You can question whether it's an advantage or a disadvantage, but it's all whatever advantages or disadvantages people have is all down to how they play the hand they're dealt in the game. So
Mm-hmm.
there are times where someone ends up on the bad side of the numbers due to how a tribal mix up works out, right? Like, is that unfair? Well, not really, it's random, right? And in the same way, this isn't random, but the point is that it's not unfair if it's the rules. It's like we said about, the idea of looking over at someone else's solution on the word puzzle challenges, right? If you're allowed to do it, if it's not against the rules, then it's not unfair.
Right.
So I didn't like that word being added to the discussion. But I certainly agreed with the larger point of getting to hang out with the jury for a while and knowing all of that information and really having a sense of where everybody's head's at and maybe what you that lets you know how to talk to each person, say the things that they want to hear, and like all of that stuff. I mean, I think there's all of that's valid. I just wish that they hadn't been talking about unfairness.
Right. And because, well, and it also, it pointed out, like, it's the reason why Chris knew that he needed to take Devins on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, we could armchair that and speculate and say, yeah, of course he would have known that, but it's hard for them to all know the mindset. If he hadn't spent all that time with all these jury members who are rooting for Devins,
Yeah.
like actively rooting for him, and the people who are in the game are actively rooting against him,
Yeah.
and it's like once you leave the game, because he got farther than you go to rooting for him.
Well, yeah,
And Chris is seeing that, and he's like, how the hell am I going to beat this guy? Like, I guess I could just hope that he gets out, but I feel like I got to take him out. That's my only chance.
Yeah, no, and I thought that was very smart of him,
Because
honestly.
he probably also knew what we didn't know. He probably also knew there was some affinity for Gavin and what Gavin was doing,
Mm-hmm.
and he probably saw that, he played that out and said, okay, wait, so Gavin's kind of like the subtle, but secondary favorite. Devins
Mm-hmm.
is the favorite. If I put them two against each other and Gavin beats him, well, then Gavin maybe
Right.
moves up a few notches.
I
If Devins beats him and he's there, I lose to him. So my only chance is to beat Devins and then go and compete to Gavin head to head. And he
Yeah.
doesn't know that if he's not with those people.
Right. Well, and then the other factor of it that I think might have really been the deciding factor is simply a matter of I am better at fire making than either Julie or Gavin.
True. Yeah.
And if I put one or the other of them against Devins and then Devins wins, then Devins wins the
Right.
game too. So if I want to have a chance at winning the game and not just getting second place, not only do I have to make sure he isn't in the final three. And the best way to do that is to put the person who's best at fire making against him. And if that's Chris and not Julie or Gavin, and it has the extra benefit of if he does it, then that's another thing in his portfolio, so to speak.
Yep.
And it's one less thing in the portfolio of the other people he's with there. So, like, once you piece all that out, even though there's a risk element to it where he could have lost and then not been in the final three, his reasoning had to be the gamble is either I risk not being in the final three against winning the game versus playing it safe now and getting what almost certainly would be second place.
Right.
So I thought that was a really interesting decision, and honestly, it played a big factor in me feeling like he deserved to win. Because before that, when we weren't at the fire making yet, and I was just thinking like, okay, if they manage to keep Devins out of the final three, who do I think should win? And at that point, I was thinking, Chris has played pretty well, but Gavin has a strong case like we've talked about. And so I was kind of even there. But making that brave, kind of bold decision and then pulling it off is like, yeah, okay, he deserves it.
Yep. Well, yeah. And it wasn't even a guaranteed thing. Like, Gavin still got 4 votes. And I think part of that is because, like, I think I underestimated how good Gavin was going to be in that final tribal. Because he's always been really soft-spoken, and he's got a little bit of that country soft-spoken, accent, and just seems kind of gets along with everybody. He's playing really hard, but he has like a very soft presence, which is part of why he comes across not as a threat.
It's like gentle.
Yeah, he's gentle. Right, but he was able to make some very, very distinct and sharp points about why his game deserved him to win. And I was like, wow. And obviously everyone including Julie knew Julie couldn't win.
Yeah.
Her whole speech was basically, I'm just happy to be here, and that was pretty much, and they basically didn't even ask her questions after that.
Yeah.
She set herself up to not have to get interrogated by just basically saying, come on, guys, I'm just happy to prove this to myself and my kids and my family and my situation. I'm happy to be here. Yeah. Yes, I would love to win, but I'm just also happy to be here. So don't get me too hard with too many questions because, I can't really defend it.
Yeah. Don't be mean to me.
Yeah, don't be mean to me. Just let me have it.
Yeah. I'm proud of myself. I feel like I did a good job getting here. You guys could reward me for that if you want, but don't be mean about anything else, because what does that get anybody at this point?
Yeah, that is basically what she said.
Yeah. So. But honestly, I kind of liked that. It's both pieces of that are true, right? Because on the one hand, I think everyone had an awareness that in terms of what sorts of play behaviors the game rewards, she had the awareness that she wasn't really on the same level of as Gavin or Chris in that regard.
Right.
But nonetheless, a lot of the stuff that she really had wanted to prove to herself, she did. And she could legitimately be proud of that and say, I came here to do that. And I did. And I'm proud of myself. And I think that's legitimate.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that and that's why I like that, again, while not just directly saying it, she didn't try to make this huge case of here's why I should win the game, I did. So, because then that only opens them up to just poke holes in why she shouldn't win the game and sort of detract from that feeling that she's having right now, and so she just kind of put this weird shield up that everybody respected, and it allowed her to just remain proud of herself, and everybody to be proud of her too. I'm proud that she made it that far, just being a suburban mom or whatever her story, and to come out there and do that, and she played well. She just didn't play a winning game. She played a top 3 game.
She made it there.
Yeah,
a lot of people didn't.
She deserved to be where she was. In the top 3 with no votes.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's go ahead and rewind back to the beginning of the episode. As we both predicted, the episode just launched right into everyone coming back from Edge of Extinction and having the challenge. And it occurred to me that this whole game mechanic put an interesting twist on something we haven't seen in recent seasons, which was the old Parade of Torches. Because it used to be that we would have this whole montage where we would remember all of the people that that had been voted out, but we needed that because, generally speaking, there was a lot of people that we literally wouldn't have seen or thought of for 10 weeks, right? But in this one, nobody really went away. They're all still there, but we can kind of talk about the whole experience of it. And I thought that was really kind of interesting.
Yep.
Um, I thought it was kind of funny that as they're going, there's the little bit where Rick's shouting encouragement for each individual person one at a time, just kind of go everybody. um, and obviously that rope tangle bit where you're clipped to the rope and you have to go all around the whole thing. That's that is a I on the one hand I feel like there's things about it that seem fun, but I could just totally imagine how frustrating it could get to just sort of realize, wait, you must have missed some loop
Right.
a while back, and now you can't figure out where you tangled yourself, and now yeah, I could just imagine how frustrating that must be.
Oh yeah.
Because there's so many different loops that you could definitely miss one and go through two others and not realize it's not an immediate thing of like just exactly how to get back to where you needed to be. But in any event, we have Aurora is sort of dominating all of these segments up to the very end, but Eric and Joe very close behind, and then Chris catches up in there too. Uh, but then it was down to Chris and Joe, and it was almost Joe. And you could see it was so close that, even with how kind of zen and calm Joe is most of the time, you could see he felt that one. It was that close. It was split second away, and then he drops the ball, and Chris wins instead. And so, like we just kind of talked about, my initial feeling at this point was like, good for him, I guess, but he's certainly not really one of the more interesting people that I would have thought could come back, in terms of what impact he would have on the game, and turned out I was mistaken.
Yeah.
But then we had the whole segment where we're, kind of honoring all of the people on, Edge of Extinction, and especially focusing on Reem, who did it the longest, was the only person who had to do that first night, first couple of nights all by herself.
Yep.
And when it was all brand new and she had no idea what it was all going to mean. Because most of the people there got to show up when everyone was saying, yeah, so here's the deal. Every day we have to go up and get water from there, and then we're going to get food from here, and it's a whole pain in the butt, but we know what's happening. But, she had no idea. It was like,
Right.
show up on this beach. There's nothing. You're going to be here for an indeterminate period of time, and maybe something will happen.
Well, and wasn't it raining or something too, or so there was?
Maybe, but it was certainly very sort of dramatic and hard. But good for her, really,
Yeah.
because and I'm glad that they took the time to focus on her both at this point in the episode and also in the live reunion at the end. Just because obviously, usually the person who gets voted out first is not someone we're thinking a lot about at the end of the season,
Right.
right? But she kind of became the first person to do a new thing in Survivor, which is to stick it out for the whole run, knowing that she wasn't likely to ever win any of it, right? Even
Right.
once the challenges started happening, she had to know she wasn't likely to win against the other people there. But she stuck it out, and like her whole reasoning was, I chose to be away from my family to do this, and I have to make that mean something. I have to make the most of this experience, because otherwise, what was the point?
Right.
And the fact that she stuck it out, that's kind of a whole Survivor thing all by itself. And I thought that was actually really cool that they took some time to honor that.
Yeah, I agree.
So then we kind of talked to a lot of the other folks there. We had Joe being kind of hard on himself, but then even as he's kind of saying that, he kind of sort of talks himself back around to the more optimistic, got to be defined by how you bounce back from adversity sort of thing. But you could see he had to kind of talk his way around back to that. It wasn't what he was feeling right away.
Right.
And, David talks about, being on Survivor gives him courage. Let's see. Um, Julia. Okay, that's why I was confused there because I wrote Julie talks about being grateful, and I realized I just in my notes confused Julie with Juliet there. She's being grateful. She's kind of all smiles at first, but then goes emotional, and then she talks about how she had come to some kind of an epiphany about grief she had been still holding on to from her dad, and I think that that's great. She was able to kind of sort of come to a new sense of peace with that.
Yeah, that was cool.
Mm-hmm. Um, Eric was kind of like he was when he was in the game, which was says fine things, but not necessarily anything really stand out. I'm trying to not say generic just because it rhymes with Eric, and that feels weird.
Yeah, Eric was generic. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was going with. Yeah.
But Aubrey was very emotional, but she also talks about true characters, how you handle your losses. I thought it was really interesting that Kelly was calm until she had to talk. And that's something that I've always been kind of interested in as a human behavior, in the sense of how communication is hardwired into deep parts of our brain.
Right.
And how, like, when you have some sort of a pain that you're experiencing, you may actually feel genuinely, I've got it together. Yeah, I'm sad about that, but I'm doing fine. I'm doing okay. But then someone starts to ask you just a few little details about it, and as soon as you start trying to talk about it, it just brings the tears all back up. And somehow expressing it verbally is different than thinking it to yourself. And something happens in our brains when we do that, and I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
mean
No,
to.
I'm just saying. No, I don't really have. I like what you're saying. So.
Yeah. As a follow on to that, everybody, that's why talk therapy is actually very helpful if you're going through stuff. So think about that if you've got something you're dealing with. Um, anyway, we also have, Chris talking about his 28 days on Edge of Extinction and the amazing feelings of coming back. And we have Probst in the live show, brings Joe out and, talks about what kind of player he's always been and can a player like him win? And, Joe is like, it's very hard.
Yeah.
And then, there's a little bit of slightly awkward teasing about, like, does that mean you're coming back? Well, I'm not going to say. You're kind of putting me on the spot here right now, right, Jeff? I want to hang up the hat, but not sell the farm. And it's like, yeah, all right. And then what was Probst doing with this suggestion that, like, oh, is it the hair? Let's shave your head or something? Like, live? What was that? That was so bizarre.
It was. His hair has gotten a little out of control, though.
It was pretty long in the reunion show for sure.
And I think that's where Probst was going with it, is that it was just kind of like.
Yeah, maybe.
It started to become kind of a joke that maybe he just needs to cut his hair. So it was odd that he tied it to like his results, but.
I guess I just sort of feel like usually Probst is so sharp, even with the live stuff, but a couple of the pieces of that conversation both felt like, was there not a plan before the live show where you guys briefly rehearsed what you were going to talk about? given that there's no surprises for either of you at this point. So I don't know, just one of those things where it sort of felt like Prost was putting him on the spot twice.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. I think that's where he was going with, but it was definitely a misstep on the.
Yeah, it felt a little bit strange, but I thought Joe rolled with it really well. But it was also kind of a strange thing to put on him. This suggestion of like, are we talking about like bringing someone out with clippers right now, or what? Like, is that what is being suggested? Like, it's not clear, and everyone's just like, what? What? Oh, okay, nothing. All right, fine. How disappointed can you be by the prospect of something you didn't know was even a question 30 seconds ago?
Yeah, it was odd. So
Yeah. In any event, uh, we have Chris as he shows back up and he's settling in, and they're having, like, the sort of the feast. Well, no, I guess the feast was later. Never mind. But talking about how, he's not really as mentally or physically there, but he does have information. He's kind of downplaying his game, and I think that it was a smart strategy, but no one bought it.
right.
Like, we immediately cut to Victoria saying he kind of tried to do a soft quit, but obviously that's stupid. Nobody believes him.
Right.
It's like, we all just watched you work really hard to win a physical and mental challenge, dude. And now you're going to try to say, oh, I'm so weak from Edge of Extinction. I couldn't possibly play.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was worth a shot, but it's kind of just amusing that nobody really even entertains whether that's possibly true.
Right.
And immediately Devins kind of approaches him and it's like, I hope your head is more in the game than you let on here. And it's like, oh, yeah, totally. And there's discussion of like,
And so it was, yeah.
Yeah, wants to go to the end with Devins. There's discussion of the idol. Devins is, absolutely on the right play of saying, I have an idol, and if I don't win immunity, I am definitely going to play it because it would be dumb not to at this point. But he wants to work with Chris, but he's also like, Chris is maybe the only person who's really even going to entertain working with me. But he is also like, I literally betrayed him over at Edge of Extinction, and as we learned later, it was a whole thing how they made amends with each other when they were both at Edge of Extinction.
Right.
Like, it was a whole thing where they had like literally had like tension and had to work it out and conflict resolution and all of that. So that makes it complicated a little bit emotionally, right? Even beyond the strategic questions.
Yep.
And that's actually one of the fascinating things about this season is that usually people wouldn't really have the opportunity to do that because when you're in the game, you're in the game. And even though Edge of Extinction is like not completely out, it is different. And I think that's really, it brings a lot of interesting chemistry to the season. But we have Chris passes a message from Wentworth to Lauren, and he's revealing like this information that he's talking about, from the council, which is basically to say, Wentworth in particular and the other people at, Edge of Extinction are thinking the only way for you to have a chance to win is to do something important. And since Wentworth knows you have an idol, basically saying that's your opportunity to potentially do something important enough to have a chance to win. And he passes that on, but also kind of like with this indication of like, I will help you play it correctly in a way that will be useful to you, right? Wink, wink, because you're playing it for me, that sort of thing. That idea. Lauren is trying to present herself to Chris as his best option. And then this is where we had the big elaborate challenge with the big old platform, I guess you call it, in the water. I thought that was actually it was a cool little detail of it that made it visually interesting in a way that it like they could have built this thing just on the beach. There was no actual part of it that was like you're going to go down in the water. But having it on the water added this little element of like, well, if you fall off the balance beam, it's not just a net. You'd fall into the water. You might have to climb back up or something, that sort of thing. I thought that was kind of cool. But,
Yeah, it was fun.
I always like these ones where there are multiple obstacles to do and you have to do all of them, but there's nothing dictating what order you do them in. And so you get people who do like the harder ones first, other people do the easier ones first, people get in each other's way. I think that's all interesting.
Yeah, it's always a big fun, the sort of mousetrap challenge that they have.
So good for Victoria that she manages to solve the lock first. Devins was the first to try it, but he didn't unlock it right away. Let's see. So we have lots of people. So Julie, Lauren, and Victoria doing well on the puzzle. Julie's was it Julie that won? I think it was. I just like didn't write it down in my notes properly.
Yeah,
I can't remember.
I think Julie won.
Yeah, I think so too, especially because part of it is like people are cheering her on, and Devins can't help but just kind of toss in as like, well, they weren't cheering for you last time. And then Chris actually comes up to help her to get her over the finish line, and Devins is a little bit like, what the hell was that, Chris? What was going on there, huh? But yeah, so she chooses Chris to accompany her due to his deprivation, and then chooses Lauren, and this is where Devins is like, he's a little frustrated because it's, I've gone to bat for Julie many times, and she never has really reciprocated at all, which is really kind of true. Because frankly, the only reason that there's any talk of her being like any sort of an ally at all is basically just that like he seems willing to forgive her when she votes against him. Right? I mean, there's really nothing else to it than that.
Yeah, I mean, she's never really done anything with him.
Yeah. Right. And then I think, though, that more than real frustration or moral disappointment is just him trying to guilt her because he's hoping that that's leverage on her.
Right.
Yeah. And he's frustrated in a similar way with Chris helping Julie, not necessarily because it's genuinely hurting his feelings so much as like that's maybe not a good sign that he's going to help me.
Right.
So on the reward, Julie basically tells Chris they're all determined to take out Devins. They hope that the idol he showed off was fake. I thought it was a little bit strange that like it's like, Julie, you mean the idol that you were wearing around your necklace at the last tribal council? But anyway, wait, no, never mind. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
but like that she saw it though is the point, that like he showed it off, right, and then didn't play it. He said he was going to play it and then didn't, was the issue.
Right.
So they're hoping that it's fake. We know that it's not, so that's kind of automatically a little bit interesting. I lost my place because I was trying to scroll around to look up something else. They discuss whether they need to split the votes between Devins and Victoria in case it isn't fake, because that's quite possible. Meanwhile, Victoria is frustrated, like, why is Julie bringing Chris on a reward and feeding the competition? Worried about, having Julie, Lauren, and Chris have the decision-making power. And she basically tells Devins the original plan was going to split between Devins and Chris. And so we certainly see how there's a distinct wedge there with Victoria, right? The others are talking about, well, let's make her the backup. So Devins is playing his idol no matter what. So we know that he's planning to do that. We know that it's real, and so to some extent, we're not worried for him in this one particularly. But he feels like he needs to get a sense of where Chris is actually at.
Right.
And so they talk about their amends being sincere, and Chris insists that he is loyal. And that we have that great moment where Devins goes, "Oh yeah, so then you're going to tell me what did you get in your bag today?" And then we literally have like flashback to it's like, "Oh yeah, well I know that when I came back from Edge of Extinction, there was something in my bag. So what is it?" And turns out to be the exact same thing, that half and half an idol, which was actually I thought really kind of cool.
Well, yeah, and also really clever of Devons to not only remember that that had happened, but challenge
Mm-hmm.
it on it. You know.
Right. So who knows if Chris would have given him the extra half if not being called on it.
Yep.
But he does get called on it, and so does give it to him. And from Chris's perspective, I think that was exactly the right thing because, frankly, he knows from having talked to Devons already that it seems very clear that he does have an idol and does plan to play it. So this whole thing of like, oh, I'm going to give this half, so that means that, if I get voted out tonight, it's gone. But we kind of know that you're not getting voted out tonight because you have a real idol you're going to play.
Right.
So the question would be, will he give it back? But it's this sort of easy promise for Chris to make in a sense because, especially once he's called on it, what other alternative is there? Really none.
No, because Devin can go make a big thing and say, "Hey, by the way, Chris has this half and half idol
yeah,
that one of you is going to get. So the rest of you should pay attention. If you are not the one who has it, why does someone else have it?"
Exactly.
And Chris' whole thing is all blown up, and he knows that.
Right. And so it's easy too because it's the sort of thing where it's like it's an easy promise to keep because the potential downside is not going to happen for completely unrelated reasons.
Yep.
But in any event, Devons talks about like, well, Chris, if you're wrong about what's going to happen, it's you that's going home. So our agreement this time, at least, is kind of on you. But Chris basically says he believes that the only way he's completely safe is if Lauren plays her idol for him. And he tells her that he thinks Devon's idol is fake. So she promises if Devons plays his idol for himself and it's real, she'll play hers for him. And that was another one of Chris's great moves of setting Lauren up to say, in order to have a chance to win, you have to do something cool with your idol. And I'm going to present a scenario where you will think that playing it for me is that cool thing.
Yes.
When it will turn out that it was not even necessary.
Right.
And
I felt really bad for Lauren.
I did, yeah.
He did a great job, but he just played her.
Oh, totally, he did. I really liked that she totally fessed up to it. People were trying to challenge that presentation of it, and she's like, "Oh no, he definitely played me." I really liked how candid she was about that. People were trying to say, "Oh, come on, you talked her into that. Like, did you really?" And she's like, "Yeah, no, that's exactly what happened."
Yeah, I would never have done this if he had not just come and tricked me into doing it. Yeah.
I really liked that. But for sure, this is a perfect example of part of what, Chris had so little resume in the game other than having won one challenge to come back in. He knew he had to be playing all out. Pedal to the metal in these few days that he was there. And so he was making big moves, biggest possible move in every scenario. And this one, is one of the ones that really paid off and was where he could really come down and say, I know I wasn't in the game as long, But when I was there, I did stuff and it worked.
Yep.
And so,
And which again, like, to back to your point about like it being unfair, like, and all the people who were sort of whining about this, because it wasn't just restricted to players. You know,
mm-hmm,
there were fans and critics and all sorts of stuff. Like, just like, oh, he only played the whatever, I think it was 12 or 13 days.
mm-hmm,
And just like, no, but the days he was there with the hand he was dealt, like you said earlier, he played so hard and so well, and it was entertaining.
mm-hmm.
Even if it wasn't as traditional, and yeah, there were more idols, and yeah, there was this, but yeah,
I mean, what it came down to is that like I was saying, I think that we shouldn't use the word like fair or unfair about it, but what is completely legitimate as a topic of conversation is how to weight different aspects of the game, right? Because it is clear that there are some advantages to being, even though you're deprived on Edge of Extinction, you also, like, it puts enormous stakes on one challenge, but you're basically free to not have to stress about it for weeks when everyone else is having to be constantly on their game every single day.
right.
And there is an advantage to that. But part of what could be taken into consideration by the jury is, given that there is an aspect of this game where you had it easier, do we want to give more weight to the accomplishments of someone who stayed in the game compared to yours?
Yep.
And that would be a fair way for them to consider their votes, right? Just like
Yep.
it's not unfair for him to come back into the game just the way that the designers of the season intended. But it's also fair for the jury to take that into account. That's ultimately what makes it not an unfairness question, is because the jury can take all that into account if they want. Right? And they chose not to, by and large.
Or they took it into account, made it.
Well,
Made it
yeah, no, I guess, I mean, they decided not to penalize him for it, or at least not enough that it, tipped the balance.
right, because again, like you said, they probably. I don't know if they were penalizing him. They were saying, like we were just talking about, when this why I kind of came up in this point is the things that he did when he had the time to do it. He did well enough to overcome any
Right.
advantage they perceived that he had by not having to be on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's back again really quickly why I thought Gavin did a really good job of driving home that argument, and really getting people to consider it.
Yeah.
And honestly, I'm not even sure all the fans who were riled up about this would be if Gavin hadn't made such a strong argument about it. So
Yeah.
anyway.
But I think I think it's a nuanced question in terms of what are the real advantages or disadvantages involved. And I think all of that is fascinating discussion, but should all be taken into account as a manner of like strategy and weighting rather than, fairness or unfairness.
Right.
Because I don't think anyone at it who stayed in the game the whole time would have wished in hindsight that they got voted out and was on the edge of extinction and then would have had to win that one challenge, right? Like, if we want to say, oh, you had an unfair advantage, it's like, well, if you had the ability to go back in time and make it so that happens to you, would you? And I'm guessing no one would. No one would choose to have had to go through it that way, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's too much risk. It puts all of the weight on having to win that one challenge. And then you're starting at a deficit, right? But in any event, Chris certainly was playing hard when he came back. Talks Lauren into wasting her idol to keep him safe, which is just a win on several different layers. of gameplay for him.
Yep.
And at the tribal council, everyone is just really upfront and open about, Devon's is public enemy number one. Devon's is still trying to guilt trip Julie, about like, oh, you're not, are you really, I'm emotional about being on the bottom, and, it was just extra hard when Julie didn't take me on that reward. And I'm like, I'm not getting the impression from his confessionals that he really feels like that about it. It's more a matter of he's hoping that Julie will help him out by trying to appeal to her emotion. And it doesn't ultimately work, but I don't think it was a bad approach.
Right.
Especially since he didn't ever have to, like, that approach didn't ever require him to do anything that would make him look bad to the jury, right? If anything, right, he's saying how, like, they've been after me all this time because they know I'm a threat, but I'm just still struggling to get by, and it does wear on you. But he's not trying to do anything about, like, it's not fair that they're picking on me or anything like that. It's like, and he's also not self-deprecating his own gameplay. Like, he's not trying to say that someone else is a bigger threat than he is, for example.
Right.
And I thought that was good because nobody would have bought that, and I think they would have thought less of him for trying that tactic.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So in any event, Devons does play his idol for himself because, of course, he should, and would have been voted out otherwise. But, of course, once he does, and Probst verifies that it's real, Lauren grimaces, rolls her eyes, but then does play her idol for Chris. He only gets one vote, so she's like...
Yep.
But Victoria goes home because the plan with Chris was the real one. Victoria was right that they were kind of distancing her. I think, too, that part of what was going on there, they talk about this a little bit, is this concern that it's all about Rick, right? It's all about Devons. Is like, we need to keep people who can possibly beat him in challenges.
Yeah, and I think Victoria we were learning, was a legit threat, not from a challenge-winning perspective, but as somebody that they thought could actually beat them in the end.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So Lauren mutters that she didn't have to play the idol. Victoria goes out saying, Devon's good play. Gavin voting for you, man. And I think, as I recall, I put in my notes, I think she was one of the... Oh, in fact, actually, she was not. I looked back in the 4 votes that Gavin got. She was not one of them.
No, Devon's was, though.
Yeah. Yeah, he was. And I would be interested to see what he would say about that. I don't know. It may be one of those things where, like, he kind of knew where the wind was blowing and felt like he didn't have to. His vote wouldn't be the deciding one.
Or, yeah, I mean, yeah. Or he thought Gavin made the strongest argument.
Yeah, could be.
And punishing Chris for not taking him down.
Could be.
Yeah, I mean, or like you said, he probably knew it was going to happen and just gave Gavin a vote.
Yeah, so I would be curious what his argument would be, but, it doesn't matter very much, really. So, let's see. So then we have Devons knowing that, like, not only was my idol played, but 2 idols were played last night. So there's almost certainly another one out there. And so, but he also, hilariously, is saying, but other people are going to know that too. They're going to be doing their own looking. So he makes 2 fakes, and including the one that was hidden at the shelter with the clue, and he hides both. He hides the clue again and the fake in that spot.
Yep.
It's amazing. And
right.
It paid such dividends too.
Right. And I think, as funny as this was, like, some of us, like, unfortunately, I think this played into some of the fatigue that some fans had with, like, there were too many idols. Like, I think they forget that, like, there weren't necessarily too many idols. Like, there were also, like, all these fake idols that were so good that they
Yeah.
felt like, and they had such an impact. Like, they weren't just like nonsense. Like, they were used effectively as fakes
Mm-hmm.
and decoys.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
also, I think part of what it is that the idols were getting played and then refound, as opposed to people who find idols and then just never play it, or they go out without playing it and that sort of thing, right? Like,
right?
so they were active more in this one, not because there actually were more of them, but because they kept getting played, rehidden, and refound.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but it's kind of just amazing that he does that. And then Julie is following Rick around. They're actually babysitting him this time. She's really like even walking in front of him, but then she walks right by it and he finds it again. And there's no
Yeah.
secret about it. Julie and Chris see it happen and they're just like, what is happening? And so at this point, I thought it was interesting that, perhaps it's all down to what they're, what they say when he gives the piece back to Chris at this point is that, when they both have idols, we couldn't turn on each other if we wanted to. And it seems like it was because their loyalty pledge was to Final Four. And it was held to that. And just because, Devins was kind of hoping, it's like maybe you will be the one person who would consider working with me from 4 to 3, because no one else will for sure. And so maybe that's still the gamble. But it's I think it's one of those where, like, in hindsight, it's kind of like when you're gambling. Sometimes you make the smart bet, but you still lose because that's just how it works.
Yeah. That's why it's gambling. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So just the fact that it didn't work out doesn't necessarily make it the wrong thing to have done. But it's also, in hindsight, we can obviously say, if he hadn't done that, how would things have played out differently? Hard to know. I mean, I guess if Chris didn't have a real idol, he would have been voted out, right, instead of Lauren. But then, maybe, and then if, Chris isn't there to win that final challenge, maybe Devins wins it,
Yeah, I think Devins is in a much better spot if Chris goes home there when you look at it in hindsight.
Yeah.
And to, like, the point that we got to earlier, now that we're kind of in that, is anybody really going to hold it against Devins? When if Chris gets up in the jury and says, like, he didn't give it back to me.
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't think anyone would have.
Right, and as much as, yeah, it wouldn't have felt right to us based on how Devins was playing for that.
Right.
And as we said, there's so many ways to look at why the gamble made sense for him.
Mm-hmm.
Not being able to forecast out all of these things that were going to happen. Because he couldn't have. I mean, even if he ran the scenario of, if Chris wins and doesn't bring me, and I have to go make fire against Gavin or Julie, I feel like I'm still in a good spot. And then I sit at the end and say, Chris, you were supposed to help me and you screwed me. And like we talked about, and Chris's only defense is, I screwed you because you're the better player.
Yeah.
And boom, like that. There's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the one thing he couldn't have factored is, what if Chris wins and doesn't take his immunity and then beats me directly? Like, and that's again why I think it was so cool what Chris did, because it would have been so hard for all these people anybody who's really good at kind of playing out the scenarios. That was the one that they probably didn't play out because it's just ridiculous. And Chris is the only one who did it. He played it out and he realized it was the right scenario.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yes, Devins probably wins if he doesn't give it back to him. But it was a valid thing to do based on where he was sitting in the game and what he thought could potentially happen, the gamble that Chris could help him, and what he felt like would happen on the downside if Chris didn't help him.
Right. Plus, I certainly don't have any hard feelings about him doing what he did because it led to the amazing scenario where all 5 people think that they're completely safe going into a tribal council.
Yes.
That was incredible.
Yes.
But in any event, Lauren's really bummed. Julie is theorizing, well, 2 idols were played. There should be another one hidden. Let's keep looking. They find one of the fakes, but then Lauren finds the other one. And she's delighted. And so now there are 5 people, 2 fake idols, 2 real idols, and now a challenge. Oh, you know what? I think this one was the one that was the multiple obstacles over the water to get puzzle pieces. The one that I was describing earlier, I think it was actually this one, not the last one.
I honestly, I think you're right. I just didn't have enough description in my notes to.
Yeah, I didn't describe the details of the challenge for the last one, and I was certainly remembering this one, but this time it's like very cool, multiple obstacles over the water to get puzzle pieces. That's obviously the one we were talking about.
You're right. The one that Julie won, I don't remember how they got the pieces, but it was at the end she built like that. It's kind of a 3D puzzle. Like it was kind of a stackable.
Yeah, that's definitely the one. Yeah.
Before, but I don't remember. They got the pieces a different way. Now that
Right.
now you're saying that,
Yeah.
and this is the one. Yeah.
Right. So in any event, we end up with Chris and Gavin both being the first to start the puzzle, but then Devins gets there and just plows through that puzzle and wins it. He's feeling very pleased with himself, and he's thinking he knows that the only person who actually feels like he's in trouble is Gavin. So he goes and sort of does this whole, I think I'll play the idol for Gavin if Gavin promises to take Devins into the final 3. To some extent, Devins is just still playing the odds here because he could have not given the idol to Gavin and let Gavin actually be at risk because he has to know, and we immediately get a confessional with Gavin, which is to say he makes a promise, but he's not necessarily intending to keep it because he shouldn't. It would be stupid.
Right.
It's like, and he kind of knows that, but he's also in a position where he literally has a surplus idol and no future opportunity to use it. He has to use it for something now, or else it's wasted.
Right, and he's looking at, he's playing the odds of who are the people who could win that final immunity and save him. One is Chris, and he has a play for him.
Right.
That again he doesn't think is probably going to happen, but he's going to do what he needs to for that.
Right.
And there's Gavin. Like I said, it doesn't hurt him to keep Gavin because just like the whole reason that Gavin's not going to bring him.
Yeah. Well, and it's
also he can beat Gavin if Gavin takes him.
Right,
So,
and it's also just process of elimination because he knows Chris has an idol, and he knows that Lauren and Julie each have one of the fakes, and he sure doesn't want to mess with that because it's amazing. So, in any event, good on Gavin for certainly doing the right thing that you do in the Survivor, which is when someone makes you an offer that involves them handing you an idol, you don't say no.
hey, just take it. See what happens.
But you know that if you broke that promise, no one is going to legitimately hold it against you. Certainly not in this type of a scenario.
No.
But now it's, we literally have all 5 people thinking they're safe, which is just astounding. And so Devins and Chris are talking about who are they going to have sent home? But they're now in kind of a scenario where it has to be either Julie or Lauren. So it seems Lauren's kind of the obvious choice there, I think. So we have the tribal council where Chris is trying to play vulnerable because it's really only him and Devins that know he has that idol. And he's trying to pitch himself as, he's doing the play that's like, this is what he would say if he were not safe, right? Yeah. It's like, I'm the one that could most likely beat him in another challenge or in fire making. But I like how Lauren and Julie kind of point out how yeah, but we don't really want to be against you in fire making either. So,
yeah.
So I thought it was interesting that that was the discussion. There's actual talk about Rick being the constant focus of attention for like 6 tribal councils running. Oh, wow. Okay, we got a Twitch raid from the T Monster, none other than T Morris, joining with a party of 9. Thank you guys. I don't know if you're probably coming from Destiny 2 or something. So here we are talking about the Survivor finale. I hope that you enjoy. Welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah, so we got
That's all the good stuff. It's all
emotes
downhill
blowing
from
up
here.
the chat now. So in any event,
It's all downhill from here, though.
right? Yeah. Well, I don't know. If you like Survivor, stay a while and listen.
Yeah, I'm saying. I think we've already kind of had all our big moments, though, of what we thought about the
Yeah,
episode.
yeah, that's
We
true.
kind of opened with it, so
But in any event, so we're in this tribal council to go from 5 to 4, the last sort of regular tribal council, right? Where we have Gavin talking about he was the first to sort of hit on this idea of I'm willing to play against the best of the best, and that's what I want to do. That's how I want to win, is by going up against the best people and being triumphant over them. And he's right in the sense that that was a big piece of what sort of catapulted Chris to victory. Was he was the one that had the opportunity to do that, and it worked.
yeah.
Yes. So T does say they were recording Happy Hour from the Tower, which is indeed a Destiny thing. So welcome. In any event, we have the votes. It's the last night to play the idols. Devins and Chris wait to let the fakes get played first because that's funny. So Julie goes up and she plays hers, and it's a fake. And then Lauren is all of a sudden going, uh-oh, what's happening? Hopefully this is real. Nope, it's not. And at this point, the jury is losing their minds. They're climbing all over each other.
No, Devins did it. They're
Yeah.
absolutely rooting for him. Like, it comes back to like how we knew he was hands down going to win this game if he could have made it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They
So
love what he did.
it was amazing. And so they're both fake. And then Devins finally goes up and plays his real idol that they all knew he had for Gavin. Chris plays one for himself. And so at this point, I can only imagine what is going through Julie and Lauren's head at this moment of going from this peak of thinking, at least I'm safe this time. But now not only is it fake, but it's literally only the two of us that could even possibly be voted for. It's so bad. Especially for Lauren, because of course she has to know that she's the target of the two. So
and she blew an idol last week.
Yeah. Oh. In any event, so 3 votes for Chris. He would have gone home, but the votes don't count. Lauren is voted out, and she gives the credit for the play to Rick, because of course she should. Even though theoretically Chris helped with this one, but certainly the fakes, that was all him. And that's a perfect example of this whole thing. It's why blindsides happen, is because you want someone to think they're safe and in control so that they don't change things up and possibly disrupt your plan even accidentally.
Yep.
So we go straight from the tribal council into this last challenge, and this whole rocking walkway and balancing the blocks with the whole thing's like a rocking horse, and then there's a separate rotating platform that the blocks are on. And I was just thinking that, like, that looks really hard.
Yeah. We've had variations of this, but nothing that had as much momentum. Like,
right.
Enough, as many changing variables.
Right, yeah. So, like, that last stretch where, like, for the longest time it seemed like Julie was the best, doing the best, but then she, dropped them all right near the end. And then, just that last stretch of nobody else is even close, and Chris just has to back up to pass the line with his last thing, and he's going super slow because no one else is even close, but just the suspense of like, oh, it could drop at any time. Oh, he made it. It was kind of really that was good.
Yeah.
Um, so good for him that he wins it. This was just once again, it's this chain of just really solid moves that he is making. I don't know, winning the challenge is not a move exactly, but certainly part of that resume process, right? Where
Yep.
he's establishing these things. So he is definitely in there at the end, it would seem. And then, it's like, my note here was good for him. Will he be loyal to Devons? In parentheses, probably shouldn't. Says he's playing to win? Definitely won't.
Well, and again, part of how this builds this resume isn't just to be able to say I won this challenge. Is it sets up the ability for him to not just go against Evans, but to rescind his ability to be safe to go against Evans.
Yeah,
which has
exactly.
way more power than like Julie or Gavin winning this challenge and he and Devins competing against Fire and him beating
Right.
Devin. Like
Yeah.
that is not nearly as strong as turning away his safety to go against the best because he thinks that's the way, that's how he wants to prove he should win this game.
Right, right.
So he needed the win to be able to set that up.
And he knows that, like, even if, like, so if he stays safe and he gets to the end, even if out of a fluke Devins doesn't win against Gavin or Julie, he goes into the final with his last decision made. Everyone knows it's about how he was afraid of Devins, right? And he would be up against someone who just beat him. Alternately, everyone knows he was afraid of Devins, and now he's there against Devins. So, like, neither of those scenarios looks good. And he could have hoped that all of his other stuff would have been enough, and maybe it would have. But feeling like the scenario that leads to the best chances at the end, it requires a risky move, but it produces less risk in the final decision.
Right.
And I thought
I think we kind of talked through this earlier. I mean, the way that he was able to run that math and actually be right about it, to say, okay, if I send Julie against Devins, she probably loses, and then I have to go against Devins, who, I didn't bring with, who can come in there and say, you were scared of me, which is why you didn't honor your bargain, and now here I am.
Here I am anyway.
Right.
And it's all part of that same narrative, just like people voted me out before, and I came back, although that's harder to use against Chris because Chris did the same thing. But anyway.
Right. but you put Gavin against Devin, and let's say Gavin beats Devins in fire making. Well, Gavin then can say, not only was I here all 39 days, but I'm the one who finally got rid of the favorite. And you were scared of him, so you put him against me, and I beat him. And I was the one that was here while you were off over there.
Yeah.
And all of his steam goes away. So literally Chris's only shot, other than what he did, is to put Julie in the fire-making challenge and have her beat Devins and just be happy she made fire faster than Devin. And everybody's like, yeah, that's cool. Like, okay. And then he maybe still doesn't beat Gavin.
And that's still a maybe, because how likely is it really that Julie's going to beat Devins?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
The map. His best case is Julie beating Devins. Then that's so low percentage, and it still doesn't guarantee that he beats Gavin.
Right. Yeah. So it's, especially once we work it all out, it seems really clear that he made the right call here.
Yes.
And not only that we could have had a scenario where, let's say, Julie or Gavin won the previous immunity challenge and were the ones making this decision, right? Seems clear that Chris would have been against Devins in fire making challenge in that scenario too, right? But he wouldn't have had that power move of giving up the immunity to do it. It's like, if you need something done, you do it yourself. That whole sort of thing gave such an aura to it that wouldn't have been there in the other scenario.
Yep.
Yeah. So in any event, Devon's goes ahead and makes the case. It's like, I could have withheld the idol. You would have been voted out. You're only here because of me. And, you know, and Chris is like, yeah, but I do still actually want to win. And if I take you to the end, I won't. So that actually matters more to me.
Which Devins is not
Yeah.
disappointed in that. He knew
Well,
that was going to
it's
happen.
right. Exactly.
He's disappointed that it didn't play out the way he wanted, but
Yeah.
not because he
Well,
thought it should have.
and
Yeah.
part of what makes the whole thing different is this whole recent, mix up of how they do these final eliminations, because Devons knows that he does still have a chance. It is not a black and white thing of you are dooming me or rewarding me. He still has a chance, right?
Yeah.
And especially at that point when he's got to be thinking, oh, I'm up against Gavin or Julie, I feel like I can beat either of them. He's not going to be too worried about it. But we get to the we have Chris actually going and doing like coaching sessions with Julie and Gavin to like which of you is better at making fire, and I can maybe train you a little bit and see how you're doing. Um, Everyone is kind of feeling like they want to try to make the best fire because they're all at this point realizing that like being able to win the challenge is like the coolest move you could still make in the game.
Right. It's the only move left. And that's where, and again, Chris then deduces, like, well, they both aren't good at making fire or good enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's the best move you can make. I have a lot of things, like, I've done a lot of things well, but I have a lot I'm up against.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I have to do it. And I just love it. I love that he calculated that,
Yeah, definitely. And, he talks about, got my.
So I get kind of angry when I see people like call him like the undeserving winner or anything like that. Like, because had he not made all of these decisions,
Mm-hmm.
like along the way, he would not have won.
Yeah,
He's a deserving winner because he played the hand he was dealt literally perfect.
Yeah, yeah. I'll admit, like, I haven't really been following like a lot of like fandom reaction or anything, so I guess I haven't seen a lot of people.
I only caught it because it was part of when I was kind of looking at the Wikipedia entry to like check and make sure I had everything in my notes.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole section on like negative fan reaction.
Oh,
which
really?
Somebody went and put that in there. It doesn't mean that's because again, it's Wikipedia.
Someone who has Wikipedia editing,
felt strongly enough to go find only the negative fan reaction ones.
That's interesting.
Yeah. However, Dalton Ross was actually pretty negative on it too. He was one of the ones that talked a lot about the idol fatigue, and that's where I said, like, I think some of that has to do with the fact, like you said, there was a lot of idols played, but then there was also 2 fake ones that were used as idols that probably contributed, whether you meant to realize it or not, to your idol fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think.
Yeah, I just pulled up the Wikipedia right now, and it does have this whole reception thing saying, received overwhelmingly negative reception from fans and critics.
Right, and it quotes one like unscientific poll where like 60% of the people like didn't agree with the winner or something, which is not overwhelming and is not scientific and is.
It's interesting because it seems like there is a growing trend in fandoms of all sorts lately to.
I know where you're going.
Yeah, like this idea, this recent thing about people circulating a fan petition to have someone else remake Game of Thrones season 8, which, like, there were certainly things about the season that I wasn't happy with either, but the idea of having some other person remake it seems bonkers to me.
But every once in a while they win. Did you see that they're reanimating Sonic?
Well, I saw that too, And that one was weird, partly just because, like, like, yeah. So like, it
Because you
seems
look
like a.
weird.
Well, no. That's not what I mean. I wasn't. So this is one of those examples where I feel like I'm able to view that whole phenomenon completely from afar because I have literally no emotional investment in Sonic or how he looks or whether the movie's good. I don't care. So I'm able to just kind of say, did the Sonic in the trailer look great? No, it doesn't do it for me, but I'm also not necessarily a huge fan of the original design either, so it's like, yep, I am not planning to see the movie either way.
Yeah. Sure.
But then the announcement that they're going to redesign it, like what I had more of a problem with there is less a matter of them deciding to listen to feedback that I am certain was not news to anybody. Because the thing is, there were posters that came out 6 months before that trailer where people looked at like the silhouette profile and said, that looks weird and bad and they should change it. There is no way that there were not lots of people telling them at every step of the process that people are not going to like this.
Yeah.
And they've, yeah.
Overwhelming.
But so the idea that they're going to, in 6 months without changing the release date, change the entire animation of the lead character who's probably in every scene.
That was my favorite joke. Like, somebody said, like, it seems like they're going to have a lot of work to do because I'm guessing Sonic is in a lot of scenes in Sonic.
Mm.
Like you said, he's literally in every scene. The movie's named after him.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably in the movie a lot.
Yeah. So this idea, though, that
Anyway.
and the first example I can think of that really felt like it did this was Mass Effect 3, and a lot of people didn't like the ending, and I thought people were overreacting in the first place, but they made an expanded version of the ending, and that made some people happier, and it's like that has started, but there's also kind of like it's there's this strange phenomenon now where it's not enough to say I liked that or I didn't like it and I'm going to say that about it, and it's one thing to say I really hated this movie, I'm mad about it, but the suggestion that that means someone should go fix it seems new. And yeah. I have really I don't even want to say mixed feelings about it. Mostly I think it's dumb.
I agree.
Yeah. So, I don't know. In any event, I can't, I will say that I feel like the whole Edge of Extinction thing won me over the course of the season. And even though, like you and I talked about this, that Chris coming back did not feel like this is the most interesting thing that could happen. And yet I feel like we were proven wrong about that. Mm-hmm. Because it was interesting how it actually played out. And I'm kind of surprised to see so many people like going really, it's like, I wonder how much of this is really like, there becomes this pile-on thing, and it's exactly what's been happening this season with Game of Thrones. Is at some point the wheel turns, and you have the Gestalt societal opinion going from this is a great show, and if you have any criticisms of it, you're stupid and must be attacked, and then it sort of twists to this is actually terrible, and if you liked anything about it, you're stupid and should be attacked.
It's right? Been unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. And
like the Gestalt on it, I mean, it has been.
Right. And it's like.
Yeah, yes, has it been a little rushed as they sort of march to the end? Probably.
Yeah.
Am I still enjoying myself on a Sunday night for an hour? Yes.
Mm-hmm. The meme I saw,
happened.
the post I saw about this issue recently that kind of resonated with me was, have people forgotten that the the Kathy Bates character in Misery is not the hero? Because that's literally what that story is.
That's good. That's really good. I hadn't heard that.
Right? Like, in Misery, they set up from the beginning that even the author is not proud of that last book where he kills off the character. He writes it bad almost on purpose because he's sick of writing those stories and he really wants to actually, it is intentionally a screw you to his fans, right? It's a dick thing to do. He is still the protagonist of the story and not the crazy person who insists on wanting him to fix it.
That's clever. I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, in any event.
The best take I had heard is that it's just people being upset that it's Game of Thrones is leaving us, and
Yeah.
so they're having the well, I never liked you anyway.
Right.
The
way I've come to think of it is like if we want to say that this show has been a journey, we can say this is a pretty bumpy landing. But once the plane is on the ground, you're not sorry you took the flight. You can say that landing was not the most fun part of that experience.
Well, some people are claiming.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Some people are claiming that they are that they have literally wasted the last 8 years, and that's why I say that's where I always have to come back to. It's an hour of our Sunday night. That's literally all it encompasses.
Well, it's like when you see these Steam video game reviews where someone gives a game a thumbs down, like 1-star review, and the little thing indicates they played like 350 hours of the game, and it's like, oh, you played 350 hours of a game, and now you're saying it's a bad game. At a certain point, you want to say, okay, whose fault is this now? But in any event,
I don't think I've ever played 350 hours of any game. But anyway,
but Survivor is actually a little bit of a different scenario because it is a show that that does specifically reinvent itself and try new things, and so it does seem.
And fans become future cast members.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
There is a different connection to it. Yes,
right.
we are correct. I feel like just like you said the term like unfair.
Yeah.
I don't like the term undeserving winner because you know what? He competed 100% within the rules, and had he not done everything that he had done, he would not have gotten voted. He got no unfair votes. He got no undeserved votes.
Right. And here's the thing. Obviously, everyone who's complaining about this is doing so because they wish Devins had won because Devins is great. And I frankly would have been happier, even happier, if Devins had been able to pull it off.
Absolutely.
But Devins also had gotten voted out and came back in as part of the Edge of Extinction.
Great. Yeah, if that hadn't existed, Devins would not have been a great character. He would not have existed for us.
He was not so great before that happened.
No.
He became great after he came back. Now, if they want to say that the whole mechanism should be shifted, that having someone come back right at the end feels unbalanced, then okay, fine. But I don't think you can really indict the whole concept because the one person who benefited from it didn't benefit as much as the other person who benefited from it. So, I mean, I think it is entirely fair to say that the enjoyment of the season could be lessened by the fact that the person that everybody wanted to have win didn't win, right? Like that's, like that can be true, like, in sports. Like, I'm going to be terrible at coming up with some good analogy for this, but there can be times where it's not like a bad call, but it's just some weird fluke happens, and it means that the team that really seems like they played better and should have won doesn't because of some weird aspect of the rules. And people can be mad about that, but it doesn't mean the game was unfair. And it doesn't mean that the rules should be changed necessarily, right? And so people can certainly be upset about the outcome, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the game was bad. Yeah. Right? And so I think that it makes perfect sense that people might be really frustrated because Devins was awesome and they wanted him to win. And having Chris come back in, who kind of feels like this non-entity, and like we kind of were in agreement that he did enough that it felt like he earned it back to us, but some people maybe it's just like we were saying, how much do you weight the different experiences of the game, right? Because on the one hand, the people who stayed in the game didn't have to go through that extra level of deprivation, that extended period of time where, oh, sure, you don't have to worry about elimination every second, but you're constantly dealing with this stress of, I could leave at any time.
Yeah.
And I am only sticking it in here, for a chance to come back. And
Yeah, in fact, there were 4 or 5 players who elected not to have that happen.
right. So if Joe had won that final challenge and come back in instead of Chris, do you think these people would be making these same arguments? I don't think they would.
No. Yeah, I don't think we'd see a lot of undeserved champion articles.
Now, I think it's perhaps possible to get lost in what could be, so a gentle criticism can sometimes be clickbaited into a vehement criticism, right? And so it could be that they say, if we're ever going to do something like this mechanic again, maybe we need to tweak it, because it did feel unbalanced for someone who was voted out so early on to come back so at the end, and it really just makes that person have had a very different experience than everyone else, and that feels weird and we don't like it.
Right. It's different than how we want our survivor winners to come about.
Right.
Where, well, yes, but and also to have the recognition that in all likelihood, like, if this person doesn't come back and do what Chris did, it's probably just a flop of, like, I mean, the guy comes back and gets voted out,
Yeah.
We just were very fortunate that we had Devins and Chris as our comebacks who really maximized this.
Yeah.
And so if you want to criticize the mechanic and say, is this really going to be a successful mechanic? Like, okay, on one hand, the likelihood that we'll get this much entertainment out of it again is very low.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of weird feeling of, even when we did get this much entertainment, did it feel a little odd that the guy who won played less than a third of the actual quote-unquote game? Okay, like, so those are our two scenarios. Like, maybe we don't use this again, or exactly the way that we did.
Yeah.
Maybe you just have the guy come back at the point where, like, Devins came back.
Yeah. See, like, for example, I'm looking at the Dalton Ross section of this, and his criticism in there really is mostly along the lines of saying it felt kind of weird. He doesn't put it at 38 out of 38 in his rankings. He puts it at 27 out of 38, which is, not near the top, but it's not terrible either.
But
right?
The other part about that is that part of the reason it's there in his rankings isn't because of the mechanic. It's because that he didn't think that there were any standout personalities in the show, which had nothing to do with the mechanic.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's mostly why he rated it that low.
Yeah.
Because he thought Devins was good, he thought Gavin was good, and everybody else was just kind of okay.
Right. I think what is interesting about looking at this is that part of what's unfortunate about this whole thing that we kind of talked about infecting online fandoms is that it takes what could be gentle questions about the mechanics of saying, okay, there was obviously a big experiment this season. Let's talk about what worked about it, what didn't work about it. Clearly, there was a little bit of a fluke of how it played out this time that felt weird to a lot of people, that someone was out of the game for most of it and then won. But the thing is, like, if the people on the jury had felt that the way about it that everyone's complaining now, they could have just voted for Gavin.
Yep.
They didn't, though.
Correct.
So, it's like, so I think it's fine to have criticisms and say, the way this was implemented was imperfect and could be improved, right? But
Yes.
what happens is that as soon as someone starts speaking negatively about anything, it can be perceived as blood in the water, and now everyone's piling on about how it's the worst thing ever. And that's frustrating. And that's true about everything else that everybody gets mad about on the internet. It's true about Game of Thrones. It's true about Lost and Battlestar Galactica. It's true about like everything anyone gets mad about in pop culture. Is that there can be this sort of internet mob effect.
Yes.
Anyway, so we kind of, I mean, we talked about the end, sort of towards the end. I don't know if, like, are we in the mood for really doing the play-by-play of the rest of the episode? I don't know.
No, because there wasn't anything in there.
We kind of talked about the big pieces of it already.
Yeah, I mean, there. And I'm looking at my notes on the tribal council, and like, there's nothing like that interesting that we didn't already talk about. I mean, I think for me, the big stroke of tribal council was Gavin overperformed to my expectations, and Julie kind of basically like excluded herself from it.
Yeah.
And everybody played ball with that. And that, yes, there were some interesting things that happened within it, but that's kind of the broad strokes for me. And I feel like that's kind of where we're at now. And, you know, we kind of broad stroked it, and so I don't need to go into the play-by-play.
Yeah,
and the rest of it.
I don't know. I didn't like time it or anything, but it felt vaguely to me like it was a shorter than usual tribal council, and it definitely felt like they moved away from this so-called new format that they've done like the last couple of seasons. It felt like they didn't do that this time.
They had it. It may have not felt as like definitive, but they definitely used it.
They didn't make a big point of saying, we just talked about the outwit portion, and now we're talking about the outlast portion. They didn't do that.
Right. They laid it out at the beginning of here's how we're going to do it, but then they didn't like ram it down.
Right. And that was always my objection too, is that I liked the more informal version instead of just having each person say their own little speech and say their piece thing and have it be more an ongoing informal conversation. I like that. But what always did feel weird to me was this artificial division into these three categories that didn't actually seem to fit the descriptions very well.
Right. That now you have to ask the outwit questions when it's just
exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we talked about the basics of all of that already. There was a point midway through the tribal council where most of the jury said they were still undecided. So, but
I think that's where it comes down to everything we were just talking about is we were truly evaluating what everybody's all up in arms about. Like they were considering that, and they were saying, is Chris worthy even with all of this happening? Or in the short time that he played this game, did he overperform enough? That's why they're up in the air. Like, they haven't made that decision yet, and they ultimately made the decision to give it to him, which makes him a deserving winner.
Yeah. So I think it's, we're certainly not either of us saying that this is immune to criticism or that you can't have negative feelings about it, because I think we both sort of, it is weird. It is the first time ever that there has been a situation like this on Survivor, and even though, we felt like he kind of pulled it off at the end, it felt weird in a way that, like, maybe they could try to find a way to avoid that possibility. But, yeah.
And what I come down to on this, which was the same as what we were talking about earlier, is the ultimate point of this is, like, to be entertained. And this season was entertaining. Like, all those things at the end that people, are criticizing. Yes, okay, some of them were kind of odd and felt weird to the way the game is normally paced, but I was entertained. I enjoyed the time that I watched it. I enjoyed the time that you and I talked about it after it happened. So ultimately, I'm okay with it. Yeah, do they need to do it every time? Absolutely not. Like, I think that there are some diminishing returns on some of these mechanisms.
Yeah.
But I leave this season satisfied with the time I spent with the season.
Right. I agree. Um, it was an interesting experiment.
Yes.
So the only thing remaining really to talk about is we got this sneak preview of a very weird looking next season, which is to have Sandra and Boston Rob return, but not to play, but instead to be off on like their own separate mentor island, and like
Yeah,
people can
this
come and
weird like, reward thing.
people can like ask their advice, but you have to like there's a risk or something, like you have to risk or give up something in order to go there. Which is an interesting concept. The big statues of the two of them is super weird, and they should not have done that. It looks bad. It's dumb. I immediately saw those and go, whoa, no, no,
Start an
thank you.
internet petition.
Yeah, in fact, we're going to start an internet petition that they CGI those big statues out before the season airs. I insist upon it.
Those were weird. I mean, the fact is, like, they're still bringing in like 20 million people a night. Like,
Yeah.
they're just gonna, but because they're constantly reinventing themselves. Like, if they just played the same straight thing every time, like, it's gonna go away.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the last episode of Game of Thrones was the most watched episode of Game of Thrones ever.
Yeah. Well, and see, it's easy to focus on all of these people who are super mad, like the people circulating the petition. But you know what? There also are a lot of people who just watch the show and then don't talk about it endlessly on the internet, and they like it fine. Or maybe they don't, but they treat it like, oh, look, it's a TV show. I was a little disappointed with the ending, just like 2/3 of TV shows that have endings.
Yeah, and I don't even want to discuss it, but when I saw that the Big Bang Theory had like people, like articles written criticizing its ending, it's like, all right, we've jumped the shark on the criticizing the endings, which is a funny reference, being that it comes from a.
The only thing I heard about that was that the elevator finally worked.
Oh, you didn't? Yeah, there's another much more supposedly controversial part that people hate.
Okay, like I stopped watching the show so long ago, I don't really know. And that's not a criticism of anyone who continues to watch and enjoy it. It was, you can't watch you can't watch all the shows.
Yeah, and it was just a sitcom, and sitcoms aren't my thing anymore. And while it was a very good sitcom, it was not.
Yeah. So in any event, I think.
Yeah. There are people criticizing everything.
Media is not immune to criticism, but it should be kept in perspective nonetheless.
Correct. All right.
All right, so we'll go ahead and leave it for this season of Survivor. It's been a fun one, despite some weirdness, I guess. But I'm satisfied, and so we'll be back next season. So if you can, try to survive until then.
Make it through the summer.
Yay!
Yeah.